Good day. We're at the Fatima Conference, Our Lady's Army of Advocates here in East Hanover, New Jersey, an event put on by Father Gruner's Fatima Apostle at the Fatima Center. And I'm here again with Professor Brian McCall, Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at the University of Oklahoma Law Center. Welcome again, Brian. We're talking about your book on the City of God and the Commonwealth. And in the first segment, we talked about some of the problems of political modernity as seen in this phony debate between the conservatives on the one hand and the libertarians / radical libertarians, both parties really arguing about the same thing. How do we get the majority to fix the thing? When in the end, it's the majority that got us there to begin with. So they're getting us nowhere, except the same old debate about what the majority wants. You propose what the church has always taught about the correct foundation of political authority in what the church has called the social kingship of Christ, which could work in a democratic framework or a monarchical framework, provided everybody recognizes and abides by what used to be called the law of the gospel. In your book, you have 6 chapters which apply the social teaching. Let's talk about some of these chapters briefly. Sure. Maybe we can get to all of them if we do it quickly enough, although obviously you can't give a complete presentation here. The first is on the natural relationship of church and state within the kingdom of Christ. What is the proper natural relationship? Is government a compact in which the people express or rather originate political authority? What does the church teach on this?
This is really the foundational chapter for the book because it sets forth all the philosophical structure for the details that follow. And it's really the fundamental principle that the conservatives and libertarians miss. What is civil society? What is the foundation of government, of law? And they struggle to find a foundation. The best they can come up with is consent theory. Well, we agreed to it. Well, the problem is this doesn't work for 2 reasons. Number one, it's a myth, as even some of the more open ones are willing to admit. Because you and I didn't consent to this government. We were just born. We live here. We didn't consent. We didn't raise our hand. We didn't sign the Declaration of Independence. We didn't sign the Constitution. And frankly, then they want to say, well, they consented 200 years ago. Why did 25 guys in Philadelphia signing a piece of paper have anything to do with me? Right? So on their own terms, they know it doesn't work. And then secondly, it doesn't work because why is that a basis of authority? Right? Authority, as you think about it, can only be given from above. Right? There's an old Roman law legal maxim. One can't give what he doesn't have. So if I don't own this chariot, I can't give it to you. If I say, I'm giving my neighbor's chariot, you're like, what are you talking about? So you can only give what you have. So if authority is the right to, or the ability to change people's normative positions by giving them definitive instructions which they have to follow, we as equal individuals, I don't have that power over you. So how can I give it to a third person to be in charge of you? It's impossible. Consent is conferring an authority that we don't have. And therefore the only real source of authority is God himself, the creator of the universe. He's the only one that has something to be given. And he can then delegate that authority to us. Now, as you rightly say, this system is compatible with any form of government. So we might have a government where the ruler, the governors, are designated by a vote of the people. But what's very, very important is the people are not conferring authority then on these rulers. They are merely designating the person who will receive that authority from God himself.
That's an important distinction. In other words, the consent to designate who will exercise authority does not create the authority.
No.
All the people are saying is, God is the source of your authority. We've picked you to receive the divine grant of authority, yes, which is not the same as the divine right of kings.
No.
We're not saying, nor does the church say, God personally picks the particular king, and he has a divine right from God.
No matter what he does.
To be king.
Right, yes.
No, we're saying that whoever is vested with political authority is vested with that authority from God, even if he is selected,
yes,
proximately by the people.
Yes.
They do not give him his authority, and consequently, they can't revoke it at will.
Exactly.
That's why the church condemns the idea of insurrections.
Yes.
Oh, well, we 25 people in Philadelphia decide that your taxation rates are too high. We're going to declare independence from you. And so let's have a revolution. The consent to authority is not revocable. All you've done is designate authority. So what does the church say about the foundation of authority in God?
And the
Give me some
foundation,
particulars.
What's important about that foundation is, again, God is everywhere. He is everything. He has created the world, and he is ordering everything. And therefore, what is the key principle is that every aspect of human life is interrelated to the other. The liberal error is to compartmentalize everything. So we have, well, there's issues related to the family, there's economics, there's politics, there's culture, there's education, there's music, but these are all these separate, unconnected little boxes that have no uniform or unified principles behind them. And with the social reign of Christ the King says, no, all of these things come from one source, and therefore they all have to work in harmony together. And so to get to the beginning of your question on the role of church and state, it explains the incredibly insane error of the separation of church and state, that there are these two boxes. The church can live over here, and then Jefferson's wall of separation keeps it away from civil government and civil society, and ne'er the twain should ever be able to hear one another speak. Leo XIII compares this insanity to the death of civil society, because he says the soul of the city, the commonwealth, is the church. The body is the civil society. And if you cut the soul off from the body, you have death. And that's why we're living in the death throes of a dying body, because this separation of church and state, the keeping away of the guardians of the divine law, the divine truth, and of the natural law, have been walled off from the project of building the everyday life of families, economics, and politics. And so our soul has been cut off from our body.
Well, the libertarians and the conservatives alike have been trained by the modern way of thinking to bark like seals at that kind of statement. Oh, you're talking about a theocracy, theocracy, theocracy. By theocracy, they mean that the Pope is king and dictates who runs the subway system and so forth. But which is
not what's meant at all. Again, what is meant by the church is that there, and again, Leo XIII in Immortality Day is very clear about this, is that the church and civil government are very distinct. They have distinct roles and distinct spheres that they are to operate and legislate in. But what's important is the subject that they legislate upon is the same thing, a human being, human people. And so the church works and makes certain ecclesiastical laws, the civil government certain secular laws, but it's insane to deny that they're making those same laws with respect to the same person. It's as if in a family, the father and mother say, well, we make our own different rules. So your father's going to tell you some rules, your mother's going to tell you some rules, but the two of them are never allowed to talk to each other and coordinate those rules. So the father says, well, you go to bed at 10. Mother says, you go to bed at 8. The child says, what am I supposed to do? I'm caught here between two people who are not talking to each other. This doesn't work. That's what Leo XIII pointed out, that it's not that the church rules civil society, but that the two must cooperate, must work together and not be rent asunder.
And it's easily shown in practical terms to be a workable thing. We're talking about the Christian legal codes of the Christian centuries, which, by the way, comprise most of the history of the Western world, excluding the past 250 to 300 years. Even up to the early 20th century, they were still in effect throughout Europe and even in many states, remnants of these Christian legal codes. So in practical terms, for example, public blasphemy, forbidden. It should be forbidden. You're attacking the holy name of God. We're prohibited in every colony, even after the ratification of the Constitution. In more modern terms, the regulation of economic activity. You don't sell pornography. You don't distribute contraceptives. You don't provide abortions for a fee, and so on and so forth. In science, the influence of the church permeates the scientific ethic. You don't do human cloning and other experiments that are contrary to the divine and natural law. Everything is coordinated by the teaching of the church, although everything has its separate function. This is not some abstruse concept. It's very easy to understand and to see how it works. When the Christian conscience informs all activity, through receiving and obeying the teaching of the church, all of society is transformed naturally. You don't need coercion. The only coercion, if you want to call it that, ultimately comes from God himself, who lays down his law.
Which can be the only source of legitimate coercion.
Right. That's the irony, that the libertarians reject any idea of a coercive ruler, even as many of them say, I'm a Christian, I believe in God. Well, he's the ultimate coercive ruler who sends you to hell, to jail, to suffer for all eternity. And yet they look at the world and they say, well, we can't have a monopoly of force over a given territory. Why not?
Well, but
What matters is how that monopoly is exercised.
But in an ironic way, by arguing for the separation of church and state, they're arguing for a monopoly on force.
Right.
That there's just the state, nobody else. And in fact, who has been for centuries, as Pope Pius X pointed out, the protector of the people against tyranny has been the voice of the church, having a place in civil life, saying, that's authoritarian, that is against the, you can't oppress the people this way. But that voice wants to be silenced behind the wall of separation.
That's true. Where is your protection against state power? If you can't stand up to the state and say, no, this is contrary to the law of God as enunciated and defended by the church, your law is void. We don't follow. That's true nullification.
That's
true.
That's
nullification with a moral standard, not nullification of whatever the majority wants to nullify on Wednesday afternoon.
Exactly.
Now, we've covered, I think, briefly and obviously inadequately the political question.
But then the rest of the book, it really is just an rolling out of those implications through the building blocks of society.
Let's talk about the economic applications.
Briefly, the next chapter looks at the family and marriage, which is the origin of economic activity. Economics is household management, it's etymology. So we go through that. Then I turn to the wider sphere of how families interact with each other, which is what we generally now today mean by political economy. And then finally look at the political realm. So specifically in the economics, what's the way these principles translate is that economic activity is necessary. It's part of our human nature. We cannot be self-sufficient as individuals. We need each other. We need to trade. We need to interact together. But we can't just do it any way we please, which means the way in which we conduct economic activity, a human activity, is always subject to Christ the King and to his laws. And so when we look at our economic collapse of today, it's brought about by a rejection of this principle, that economics can do whatever you can get away with, whatever you can do. If you can convince someone to buy a loaf of bread from you for $50 because they're starving, well, as long as they agree, that's fine. Without any, again, it's like nullification. If people agree to pay $50 for a loaf of bread, great, we can do it. No reference to this objective moral standard.
It's the old error of whatever is done between consenting adults is permissible.
Permissible.
Of course, the meaning of the word consent is considerably elastic in libertarian thought. They don't recognize such things as unconscionability, undue influence.
Yes.
The only thing they recognize as a limitation on consent is outright force. You put a gun to someone's head.
Sometimes they recognize that.
Sometimes. Or fraud. I promise you a loaf of bread for $50, and I only give you half a loaf of bread for $50. So they would say you should get a discount of $25. You're still being exploited, but you were defrauded of the half a loaf of bread. But you mentioned something at the beginning of your discussion of the economic application about the family. Let me ask you to focus on the essential element of the family in economy. Why is that so fundamental?
Well, because the family is the starting point of society, where human beings are born to be reared and to be brought out into the larger society. And that is the basic unit, the basic building block of the political economy and the political community in general. And so it's no surprise when we have a false understanding of politics, a false understanding of economics, what is being perpetrated today is a false understanding of its building block, the family. And so the family is not what it was ordained by God in creation to be, a man and a woman in a lifelong union for the procreation and rearing of children. It's whatever two consenting adults want it to be. And if for me, a family is me and some other man, or me and my dog, as some people are even starting to propose, well then who's to stop that from being a family?
Another example of how if you undermine the foundation, you undermine the entire structure.
Yes.
I wish we could talk about this for hours. Tell people how they can get your book.
It, again, should be available by June or July this summer from Angelico Press.
And the title again?
The title is On the Commonwealth and on the City of God.
Well, it'll be available on Amazon.com?
And it should be available on Amazon.com as well, yes.
Great. Brian, I hope people pick it up and read it and learn about the forbidden ideas that political modernity has banished from the 3x6 and the 4x6 index cards. Thanks for coming, Brian.
Thank you, Chris.